Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the next thrilling and astounding, amazing adventures of the reading cow from another world with the inimical, abominable, reprehensible, inimitable... did I say astounding? Wait a minute. Are we rolling? What is it? The taciturn yet loquacious, saturnine yet jovial, ebullient and effervescent reading cow from another world show thing, which this is today. Oh my goodness, have we got a special treat. We have jokes and their relation to the unconscious from the Strachey Complete Freud. And I'd just like to make a couple of comments before we begin. Strachey says complete, and it's not. There's a lot of really important stuff that was left out. And the people who are in the know what I'm talking about. So whenever I'm reading from Strachey and it says complete, I always just like to, give that little caveat. It's not complete. The page numbers here are going to be the Strachey page numbers. Okay, so without further ado, jokes in their relation to the unconscious by Sigmund Freud, 1905. A. Analytic Part 1, Introduction. Anyone who has at any time had occasion to inquire from the literature of aesthetics and psychology what light can be thrown on the nature of jokes and on the position they occupy will probably have to admit that jokes have not received nearly as much philosophical consideration as they deserve in view of the part they play in our mental life. I have a mental life. It's a joke. Get it? Okay. Only a small number of thinkers can be named who have entered at all deeply into the problems of jokes. Among those who have discussed jokes, however, are such famous names as those of the novelist Jean-Paul Richter and the philosophers Theodore Vischer, Kuno Fischer, and, is nothing going to go right for me today? Theodore Lips. Okay, so we want to keep these names in mind. Jean-Paul, Jeanpaul, Richter, Rachter, Theodore Vischer, Theodor, Vischer, Kuno, Kuno, Fischer, Fischer, and Theodore, Theodor, Lips, Lipps. But even with these writers, the subject of jokes lies in the background, while the main interest of their inquiry is turned to the more comprehensive and attractive problem of the comic. The first impression one derives from the literature is that it is quite impracticable to deal with jokes otherwise than in connection with the comic. Okay. According to Lips, 1898, a joke is something comic which is entirely subjective. It's a strong word, folks. Entirely subjective. Non sequitur. Yeah, okay. That is something comic which we produce, which is attached to action of ours as such, to which we invariably stand in the relation of subject and never of object. Not even of voluntary object, I bid 80. This is explained further by a remark to the effect that in general we call a joke any conscious and successful evocation of what is comic, whether the comic of observation or of situation. I bid 78. It is this book that has given me the courage to undertake this attempt, as well as the possibility of doing so. Fisher, 1889, illustrates the relation of jokes to the comic with the help of caricature. Caricature. Which in his account he places between them. The comic is concerned with the ugly, unlike me, and very handsome and attractive, in one of its manifestations. If it is concealed, it must be uncovered in the light of the comic way of looking at things. If it is noticed only a little or scarcely at all, it must be brought forward and made obvious, so that it lies clear and open to the light of day. In this way, caricature comes about. I bid 45. Our whole spiritual world, the intellectual kingdom of our thoughts and the ideas, sorry about that definite article there, I slipped in. Our whole spiritual world, the intellectual kingdom of our thoughts and ideas, does not unfold itself before the gaze of external observation. It cannot be directly imagined pictorially, invisibly, and yet it, too, contains its inhibitions, its weaknesses, and its deformities. A wealth of ridiculous and comic contrasts. In order to emphasize these and make them accessible to aesthetic consideration, a force is necessary which is able not merely to imagine objects directly, but itself to reflect on these images and to clarify them. A force that can illuminate thoughts. The only such force is judgment. A joke is a judgment which produces a comic contrast. It has already played a silent part in caricature, but only in judgment does it attain its peculiar form in the free sphere of its unfolding. I bid 49 to 50. It will be seen that the characteristic which distinguishes the joke within the class of the comic is attributed by Lips to action, to the active behavior of the subject, but by Fisher to its relation to its object, which he considers is the concealed ugliness of the world of thoughts. It is impossible to test the validity of these definitions of the joke. Indeed, they are scarcely intelligible. I'll second that. Unless they are considered in the context from which they have been torn. It would therefore be necessary to work through these authors' accounts of the comic before anything could be learnt from them about jokes. Other passages, however, show us that these same authors are able to describe essential and generally valid characteristics of the joke without any regard to its connection with the comic. The characterization of jokes, which seems best to satisfy Fisher himself, is as follows. A joke is a playful judgment. I bid 51. By way of illustration of this, we are given an analogy. Quote, just as aesthetic freedom lies in the playful contemplation of things. I bid 50. Elsewhere, I bid 20. The aesthetic attitude towards an object is characterized by the condition that we do not ask anything of the object, especially no satisfaction of our serious needs, but content ourselves with the enjoyment of contemplating it. The aesthetic attitude is playful in contrast to work. It might be that from aesthetic freedom there might spring too a sort of judging, released from its usual rules and regulations, which on account of its origin I will call a playful judgment. And that, in this concept, is contained the first determinant, if not the whole formula that will solve our problem. Bear with me. Okay, we're getting to the meat of things. Okay. Freedom produces jokes, and jokes produce freedom, wrote John Paul. Joking is merely playing with ideas. Ibid 24. A favorite definition of joking has long been the ability to find similarity between dissimilar things. That is, hidden similarities. Jean-Paul has expressed this thought itself in a joking form. Joking is the disguised priest who weds every couple. Okay, I just as a little caveat, folks, I'd like to give an example. In the documentary on Captain Beefheart called Some Yo-Yo Stuff, David Lynch makes a cameo appearance to have a little chat with our hero Don. And he says, I just want to know, what you have to say about being out there in the desert, in the sun, in the heat of the desert sun. And Don, the inimitable Captain Beefheart, replies, well, I'm glad it didn't stroke me. Okay, so, yeah, that's an example of that. The similarity between dissimilar things. Okay, and noticing it. Okay, Jean-Paul has expressed this thought itself in joking form. Joking is the disguised priest who weds every couple. Vischer carries this further. He likes best to wed couples whose union their relatives frown upon. Vischer objects, however, that there are jokes where there is no question of comparing, no question, therefore, of finding a similarity. So he, slightly diverging from Jean-Paul, defines joking as the ability to bind into a unity with surprising rapidity several ideas which are in fact alien to one another, both in their internal content and in the nexus to which they belong. Vischer again stresses the fact that in a large number of joking judgments, differences rather than similarities are found. And Lips points out that these definitions relate to joking as an ability possessed by the joker and not to the jokes which he makes. Other more or less interrelated ideas which have been brought up as defining or describing jokes are a contrast of ideas, sense and nonsense, bewilderment and illumination. Definitions such as that of crepellin, Kraepelin, crepellin, lay stress on contrasting ideas. A joke, is the arbitrary connecting or linking, usually by means of a verbal association of two ideas, which in some way contrast with each other. A critic like Lips had no difficulty in showing the total inadequacy of this formula. I'm not going to have any of your lip. Boom. Okay. But he does not himself exclude the factor of contrast, but merely displaces it elsewhere. The contrast remains, but it is not some contrast between the ideas attached to the words, but a contrast or contradiction between the meaning and the meaninglessness of the words. Now, in my view, folks, the whole thing, all these things in various ways tie in to Captain Beefheart's response to David Lynch when he asked him about how he felt about the sun in the desert, and he said, well, I'm glad it didn't stroke me. And if you can't see that relationship, you could contact me sometime, and I'll try to elaborate on this more. But I think it's significant. Okay, he gives examples to show how this is to be understood. A contrast arises only because we grant its words a meaning which, again, we nevertheless cannot grant them. Again, I think Beefheart's response illustrates this. Okay, Ibid 90. If this last point is developed further, the contrast between sense and nonsense becomes significant. What at one moment has seemed to us to have a meaning, we now see is completely meaningless. That is, what in this case constitutes the comic process. A remark seems to us to be a joke if we attribute a significance to it that has psychological necessity, and as soon as we have done so, deny it again. Hey, wait a minute. That's not what that means. Oh, he's mixed up, this guy. Yeah, okay. Right. You see it? Pay attention, folks. Okay. Various things can be understood by this, quote, significance. We attach sense to a remark and know that logically it cannot have any. We discover truth in it, which nevertheless, according to the laws of experience or our general habits of thought, we cannot find in it. We grant it logical or practical consequences in excess of its true content. In excess of its true content, only to deny these consequences as soon as we have clearly recognized the nature of the remark. I'm glad it didn't stroke me. Okay. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, sunstroke. Yeah, that, you know. Yeah, okay. In every instance, the psychological process which the joking remark provokes in us, and on which the feeling of the comic rests, consists in the immediate transition from this attaching of sense, from this discovering of truth, and from this granting of consequences to the consciousness or impression of relative nothingness. IBIT 85. However penetrating this discussion may sound, the question may be raised here whether the contrast between what has meaning and what is meaningless, on which the feeling of the comic is said to rest, also contributes to defining the concept of the joke insofar as it differs from that of the comic. The factor of bewilderment and illumination, too, leads us deep into the problem of the relation of the joke to the comic. Kant says of the comic in general that it has the remarkable characteristic of being able to deceive us only for a moment. Heymans, that's Heymans, 1896. Heymans explains how the effect of a joke comes about through bewilderment being succeeded by illumination. He illustrates his meaning by a brilliant joke of Heinz. Okay, this Heinz or Haynes or Heine or whatever, it's a Heine, like Heine. Okay, okay. He illustrates his meaning by a brilliant joke of Heinz, who makes one of his characters, Hirsch Hyacinth, the poor lottery agent. Okay, this Hirsch Hyacinth is HARSCH-HYACINTH. The poor lottery agent boast that the great Baron Rothschild, I don't need to spell that one, you know, the Rothschilds, okay, had created him quite as his equal, quite familiarly. Here, the word that is the vehicle of the joke appears at first simply to be a wrongly constructed word, something unintelligible, incomprehensible, puzzling. It accordingly bewilders. The comic effect is produced by the solution of this bewilderment, by understanding the word. Lips, 1895, adds to this, that this first stage of enlightenment, that the bewildering word means this or that, is followed by a second stage in which we realize that this meaningless word has bewildered us and has then shown us its true meaning. It is only the second illumination, this discovery that a word which is meaningless by normal linguistic usage has been responsible for the whole thing, this resolution of the problem into nothing. It is only the second illumination that produces the comic effect. Okay, yeah. Familiarly. Get it? Millionaire? Yeah. Bad joke. Okay. Whether the one or the other of these two views seems to us to throw more light on the question, The discussion of bewilderment and enlightenment brings us closer to a particular discovery. For if the comic effect of Hein's familiarity depends on the solution of the apparently meaningless word, the joke must no doubt be ascribed to the formation of that word and to the characteristics of the word thus formed. Another peculiarity of jokes, quite unrelated to what we have just been considering, is recognized by all the authorities as essential to them. Brevity is the body and the soul of wit. It is its very self, said Jean-Paul, 1804, Part 2, paragraph 42, in case you couldn't find it. Merely modifying what the old chatterbox Polonius says in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Quote, therefore, since brevity is the soul of wit and tediousness, the limbs and outward flourishes, I will be brief, he said loquaciously with some turgid bombast. Okay. In this connection, the account given by Lips, 1898-90, of the brevity of jokes is significant. A joke says what it has to say, not always in few words, but in too few words, that is, in words that are insufficient by strict logic or by common modes of thought and speech. It may even actually say what it has to say by not saying it. We have already learnt from the connection of jokes with caricature that they must bring forward something that is concealed or hidden. Fisher, 1889-51. I lay stress on this determinant once more because it too has more to do with the nature of jokes than with their being part of the comic. I am well aware that these scanty extracts from the works of writers upon jokes cannot do them justice. In view of the difficulties standing in the way of my giving an unmistakably correct account of such complicated and subtle trains of thought, I cannot spare curious inquirers the labor of obtaining the information they desire from the original sources. Words of wisdom, folks. Go read the stuff. Yeah, okay. But I am not sure they will come back fully satisfied. The criteria and characteristics of jokes brought up by these authors and collected above, activity relation to the content of our thoughts, the characteristic of playful judgment, the coupling of dissimilar things, contrasting ideas, sense and nonsense, the succession of bewilderment and enlightenment, the bringing forward of what is hidden, and the peculiar brevity of wit. All this, it is true, seems to us at first sight so very much to the point and so easily confirmed by instances that we cannot be in any danger of underrating such views. But they are dijecta membra, which we should like to see combined into an organic whole. When all is said and done, they contribute to our knowledge of jokes no more than would a series of anecdotes to the description of some personality of whom we have a right to ask for a biography. We are entirely without insight into the connection that presumably exists between the separate determinants. What, for instance, the brevity of a joke can have to do with its characteristic of being a playful judgment? We need to be told further whether a joke must satisfy all these determinants in order to be a proper joke, or need only satisfy some, and if so, which can be replaced by others and which are indispensable. We should also wish to have a grouping and classification of jokes on the basis of the characteristics considered essential. The classification that we find in the literature rests on the one hand on the technical methods employed in them, e.g. punning or play upon words, and on the other hand on the use made of them in speech, e.g. jokes used for the purposes of caricature or of characterization or joking snubs. We should thus find no difficulty in indicating the aims of any new attempt to throw light on jokes. To be able to count on success, we should have either to approach the work from new angles or to endeavor to penetrate further by increased attention and deeper interest. We can resolve that we will at least not fail in this last respect. It is striking with what a small number of instances of jokes recognized as such the authorities are satisfied for the purposes of their inquiries, and how each of them takes the same ones over from his predecessors. We must not shirk the duty of analyzing the same instances that have already served the classical authorities on jokes, but it is our intention to turn besides to fresh material so as to obtain a broader foundation for our conclusions. It is natural, then, that we should choose as the subjects of our investigation examples of jokes by which we ourselves have been most struck in the course of our lives, and which have made us laugh the most. Is the subject of jokes worth so much trouble? There can, I think, be no doubt of it. No doubt about it, folks. It's going to be worth it. Okay, that's the hook. Leaving on one side the personal motives which make me wish to gain an insight into the problems of jokes, and which will come to light in the course of these studies, I can appeal to the fact that there is an intimate connection between all mental happenings. A fact which guarantees that a psychological discovery, even in a remote field, will be of an unpredictable value in other fields. We may also bear in mind the peculiar and even fascinating charm exercised by jokes in our society. A new joke acts almost like an event of universal interest. It is passed from one person to another like the news of the latest victory. Even men of eminence who have thought it worthwhile to tell the story of their origins, of the cities and countries they have visited, and of the important people with whom they have associated, are not ashamed in their autobiographies to report their having heard some excellent joke. That came from von Falke's memoirs, Vonfalke, Falke? Von Falk's memoirs, 1897. 2. The technique of jokes. Let us follow up a lead presented to us by chance and consider the first example of a joke that we came across in the preceding chapter. In the part of his Riesbilder entitled Die Bäder von Lucca, Heine introduces the delightful figure of the lottery agent, extractor and extractor of corns, Hirsch Hyacinth of Hamburg, who boasts to the poet of his relations and with the wealthy Baron Rothschild, and finally say, "And as true as God shall grant me all good things, doctor, I sat beside Salomon Rothschild, and he treated me quite as his equal, quite familiarly." Ba-dum-bum. Heyman and Lips use this joke, which is admittedly an excellent and most amusing one, maybe, to illustrate their view that the comic effect of jokes is derived from the bewilderment and illumination. See above. We, however, will leave that question on one side and ask another. What is it that makes Hirsch Hyacinth's remark into a joke? There can be only two possible answers. Either the thought expressed in the sentence possesses in itself the character of being a joke, or the joke resides in the expression which the thought has been given in the sentence. In whichever of these directions the character of being a joke may lie, we will pursue it further and try to lay hands on it. A thought can in general be expressed in various linguistic forms, in various words, that is, which can represent it with equal aptness. Hirsch Hyacinth's remark presents his thought in a particular form of expression, and as it seems to us, a specially odd form, and not the one which is most easily intelligible. Let us try to express the same thought as accurately as possible in other words. Lips has already done so, and in that way has to some extent explained the poet's intention. He writes, 1898-87, Heine, as we understand it, means to say that his reception was on familiar terms, of the not uncommon kind, which does not as a rule gain an agreeableness from having a flavor of millionairedom about it. We shall not be altering the sense of this if we give it another shape, which perhaps fits better into Hirsch Hyacinth's speech. Rothschild treated me quite as his equal, quite familiarly. That is, so far as a millionaire can. A rich man's condescension, we should add, always involves something not quite pleasant for whoever experiences it. We shall return to this same joke later on, and we shall then have occasion to make a correction in the translation of it given by Lips, which our own version has taken as its starting point. This, however, will not affect the discussion that follows here. Whether now we keep to the one or the other of the two equally valid texts of the thought, we can see that the question we asked ourselves is already decided. In this example, the character of being a joke does not reside in the thought. What Heine has put into Hirsch Hyacinth's mouth is a correct and acute observation, an observation of unmistakable bitterness, which is understandable in a poor man faced by such great wealth. But we should not venture to describe it as in the nature of a joke. If anyone is unable in considering the translation to get away from his recollection of the shape given to the thought by the poet, and thus feels that nevertheless the thought in itself is also in the nature of a joke, we can point to a sure criterion of the joking character having been lost in translation. Hirsch Hyacinth's remark made us laugh aloud, whereas its accurate translation by Lips, or our own version of it, though it may please us and make us reflect, cannot possibly raise a laugh. But if what makes our example a joke is not anything that resides in its thought, we must look for it in the form, in the wording in which it is expressed. We have only to study the peculiarity of its form of expression to grasp what may be termed the verbal or expressive technique of this joke, something which must stand in an intimate relation with the essence of the joke, since if it is replaced by something else, the character and effect of the joke disappear. Moreover, in attributing so much importance to the verbal form of jokes, we are in complete agreement with the authorities. Thus Vischer, 1889-72, writes, It is in the first place its sheer form that makes a judgment into a joke, and we are reminded of a saying of Jean Paul's, which, in a single aphorism, explains and exemplifies this precise characteristic of jokes. Such is the victorious power of sheer position, whether among warriors or wades. In what, then, does the technique of this joke consist? What has happened to the thought as expressed, for instance, in our version, in order to turn it into a joke that made us laugh so heartily? Two things, as we learn by comparing our version with the poet's text. First, a considerable abbreviation has occurred. In order to express fully the thought contained in the joke, we were obliged to add the words, R treated me quite as his equal, quite familiarly. A postscript, which, reduced to its shortest terms, ran, that is, so far as a millionaire can. Even so, explanatory sentence. The poet puts it far more shortly. R treated me quite as his equal, quite familiarly. Ha. In the joke, the whole limitation added by the second sentence to the first, which reports the familiar treatment, has disappeared. But not quite without leaving a substitute from which we can reconstruct it. For a second change has also been made. The word familiarly, in the unjoking expression of the thought, has been transformed into the text of in the text of the joke into familiarly. And there can be no doubt that it is precisely on this verbal structure that the joke's character as a joke and its power to cause a laugh depend. The newly constructed word coincides in its earlier portion with the familiar of the first sentence, and in its final syllables with the millionaire of the second sentence. It stands, as it were, for the millionaire portion of the second sentence, and thus for the whole second sentence, and so puts us in a position to infer the second sentence that has been omitted in the text of the joke. It can be described as a composite structure made up of the two components, familiar and millionaire, and it is tempting to give a diagrammatic picture of the way in which it is derived from those two words. And here we have familiar, millionaire, and familiar. The two words are printed, one in Roman and the other in italic type, and the syllables common to them both are printed in thick type. The second I, which is scarcely pronounced, could of course be left out of account. It seems probable that the fact of the two words having several syllables in common offered the joke technique the occasion for constructing the composite word. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the next astounding, amazing, thrilling, inimical, abominable, reprehensible, effervescent, ebullient, loquacious yet taciturn, jovial yet saturnine episode of the Reading Kaufman of the World show thing, bedtime stories for the baby thing that this is. Join us again next time when we'll continue with the next installment of the section of the chapter of the jokes and their relation to the unconscious by Sigmund Freud. Until then, goodbye.